I'd like to talk a bit about a word I'm sure you never hear anything about in the health world: sugar. I think most of us know that sugar is not the healthiest type of carb you can eat. But here at PartnerMD, we health coaches often get questions about types of sugar, namely natural sugar versus added sugar. Let's talk about that and some of the main things to keep in mind when tracking sugar generally. First, we should talk about total sugar, which would be the sum of all the sugars, including natural sugar and added sugar. Now, if your goal is to lose body fat, improve your cholesterol, A1C, blood glucose, even general health, monitoring and lowering your total sugar intake is probably a good idea. You can do this by checking labels to start. Here's a sample label with total and added sugar. Notice that sugars are listed under carbohydrates, which can be confusing. Though sugar is a carb, I can assure you that by the rationale of this label, 27 grams of sugar is not 10% of what you want for the day. That would be 270 grams of sugar, or the equivalent of about 7 cans of Coke. So we shouldn't think of sugar as just another carb. That's just a side note. Along with watching your labels, you can use free apps like MyFitnessPal to track a few days and see how you come out on sugar totals. Sugar is everywhere in the food supply, and it's present in many foods that wouldn't seem to contain it on first glance. So in the interest of keeping total sugars down, that means reducing both added sugars and natural sugars. Speaking of natural sugars, how do they factor in your sugar total? Well, first of all, there's nothing in the sugar itself that's better than added sugar. I mean, they're both sugar. However, unless you're me alone on a Saturday night, we don't eat pure sugar right out of the bag. And the usually plant-based foods that contain natural sugars tend to have other benefits to us: vitamins, minerals, what they call phytochemicals or life chemicals, fiber, water, more, all kinds of things. When you eat sources of natural sugar, you're getting something helpful with something that's not as helpful. It's a mixed bag. This means that overall, we should aim for most of our sugar intake, if not all, being from these plant sources with minimal processing, like carrots, berries, sweet potatoes, things like that. But always keeping total sugars in mind. Now let's contrast natural sugars with added sugars. Sugars often occur in a food that probably has less of a helpful context or background, namely a processed food. In fact, to add a sugar is kind of a form of processing anyway. It clearly pumps up your sugar intake, obviously, because it's added onto what's already there, which is something we want to keep down in our totals. I'll sometimes recommend that a patient allow themselves some limited sugars and processed foods as part of a planned reduction over time. There's not much good about added sugars, really. Some of the most common culprits that have added sugars are the obvious ones, like candy bars and fruit snacks, things like that. However, sometimes even healthy-sounding bars that include words like nature and protein can have added sugar. It can show up in any processed or prepared food product, really. Here's a can of vegetable soup, for example. Vegetables, what could go wrong, right? Along with this, we should make a note that the speed at which the blood sugar increases when you eat a food is as important as the total amount of sugar you're getting. In the presence of nutrients like fiber, the sugar increase can slow down. So the absorption is slower, and you don't have as high of an increase and as fast of an increase as you would have without those nutrients. See natural sugars. So with natural sugars, you have a slower absorption of sugar. You can see on the glycemic index graph here. Glycemic index really is a measure of the speed of that increase of blood sugar. And a food with natural sugar, with fiber, with these other nutrients would tend to make a slower increase, more green in the context of this graph. It's that slow, steady blood sugar increase we're looking for to keep your total sugars down, to keep the blood sugar fluctuations low. So keep that in mind when tracking sugar too, the speed and also the amount. And you can Google glycemic index chart for more info on specific foods. A higher glycemic index indicates the food's more like pure sugar in your body. Things like white bread are very high on that, whereas foods like all your proteins, basically fish, beef, chicken, eggs, are very so low they're not even on the chart. As you can see here, some of the non-starchy vegetables too, most of your salad ingredients are going to be very, very low too, which is a good thing. And by combining foods, if you're going to have some rice or something which might be moderate on the glycemic index, if you add a little bit of beef to that or chicken, it slows down that blood sugar increase kind of by diluting it. To contrast this with processed foods, they tend to be or have less fiber and to be really very easily digestible, which makes their sugar increase, their glycemic index higher or faster. Just to recap, try to get your added sugar intake close to zero and limit your total sugars, even in the forms of natural sugar, to, I would say, less than about 10% of your total calories. If you're really trying to reduce or not a competitive athlete or an intense exerciser, I usually tell patients to keep it around 25 to 40 grams a day, depending on the situation. This is a pretty arbitrary number I use, but it tends to keep it to about 5 to 10% of your total calories. So it's pretty low, but it still allows you some fruit, each day, some sugars and things like that. And of course, this is a typical day. It's not part of as a part of a healthy diet routine. Not an absolute law that you can never violate ever at a birthday party or ever a wedding, that type of thing. Since you can't avoid all sugar, keep your sugar intake limited to those foods that are high in other benefits, at least. So you'll get some of those helpful chemicals and vitamins. Things like berries, carrots, sweet potatoes, apples. These foods have other benefits. At least you're getting something for the sugar. Quick visual portioning around carbs I usually share with patients is to keep your fruit/grain intake to about a handful per meal, maybe 2 at dinner. Sometimes some extra carbs at dinner can help with sleep, but generally, 3 to 4 handfuls a day if you're trying to reduce your carb intake. I hope all that helps. Thanks again for checking us out. If you're not a patient of PartnerMD, I hope you'll look into us and our whole person approach to health and wellness.